Welcome to Sacred Truth. If this exploration helped you see Scripture as a living challenge rather than distant history, we invite you to continue with my channel. Support thoughtful engagement with Scared Truth by liking this video. Like and subscribe for future reflections where Scripture, history, and moral courage meet. And consider sharing this with someone wrestling with questions of faith, authority, or meaning. Do not fear. These words appear repeatedly throughout Scripture. They are familiar, they are comforting, and they are often misunderstood. In modern religious media, do not fear is frequently used as a sedative, a way to calm anxiety without addressing its source. It becomes a phrase designed to soften reality rather than engage it. Fear is mentioned briefly, then dismissed quickly, as though reassurance alone were enough to transform the human heart. But in the Bible, do not fear never functions that way. It is not a dismissal of danger. It is not a denial of uncertainty. It is not an escape from responsibility. It is a call to courage. One of the most striking features of biblical faith is its honesty. The Bible does not pretend the world is safe. It does not hide the presence of threat, suffering, or loss. When Scripture says do not fear, it almost always does so in the presence of something that is genuinely frightening. Armies are real, exile is real, persecution is real, death is real. Fear is not treated as irrational. It is treated as human. This is why biblical encouragement never begins by minimizing danger. It begins by naming it. Only after reality is acknowledged does God speak words of courage. Any message that tells people not to fear without acknowledging what they face is not biblical reassurance. It is emotional avoidance. Comfort seeks to reduce emotional discomfort. Courage prepares a person to face what cannot be avoided. Much modern religious messaging focuses almost entirely on comfort. It promises safety without sacrifice, peace without endurance, and protection without obedience. The result is a faith that feels good but collapses under pressure. Biblical faith works differently. When Scripture says do not fear, it is not removing the future, it is strengthening the person who must walk into it. This distinction matters. A faith built only on comfort becomes fragile. A faith built on courage becomes resilient. In the Bible, do not fear is rarely spoken to people who are comfortable. It is spoken to those about to obey, to those facing calling, to those entering uncertainty. Abraham hears it when leaving everything familiar. Moses hears it when confronting power. Joshua hears it before leading a vulnerable people. The disciples hear it as they are sent into a hostile world. Do not fear is not a reward. It is preparation. Today's fears often lack a single visible enemy. They are diffuse, persistent, mental, fear of instability, fear of loss, fear of the future, fear of being unprepared. Modern anxiety thrives in uncertainty. And this is precisely why vague reassurance feels attractive. It offers emotional relief without demanding change. But Scripture does not treat fear as something to be numbed. It treats fear as something to be transformed. Do not fear is not a motivational slogan. It is not optimism. It is not denial. It is not confidence in outcomes. Biblical courage is rooted in trust in God's presence and purpose, not in predictions about how things will turn out. Many people want reassurance that nothing bad will happen. The Bible offers something different. It offers the assurance that God will be present even when difficult things do happen. This is a harder promise, but it is a truer one. Modern God message content often claims certainty about the future. I know what's coming. Take in. I have already prepared the way. Nothing will harm you. These statements feel comforting, but they subtly remove one of the Bible's most important themes: faith without full knowledge. Scripture does not promise believers full visibility into the future. It promises guidance for obedience without certainty. Faith does not grow where outcomes are guaranteed. It grows where trust is required. The Bible never promises that the future will be easy. It promises that God will be faithful. It never promises protection from all pain. It promises presence in the midst of pain. It never promises that fear will disappear. It promises that fear will not have the final word. This is why do not fear is always paired with action in Scripture. Do not fear, go. Do not fear, speak. Do not fear, stand firm. Do not fear, obey. Courage is always directional. In uncertain times, People are tempted to seek reassurance that asks nothing of them. But the Bible offers a different kind of hope. Not escape from reality, but strength to face it. Not emotional sedation, but spiritual formation. Not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. This is the kind of faith that endures. And this is the kind of courage Scripture calls believers toward. The Bible does not end fear by predicting the future. It ends fear by anchoring trust. Trust not in circumstances, not in emotional comfort, not in soothing voices, but in the unchanging faithfulness of God revealed through Jesus Christ, who did not promise his followers safety, but promised to be with them always. This is not an easy message, but it is a true one, and it is the beginning of real courage. Fear is not random. It does not appear out of nowhere, and it does not exist without meaning. In Scripture, fear is never treated as a mere emotional glitch. It is a signal, a revelation of what the heart is clinging to and what it believes is ultimately in control. Fear reveals trust, not what we say we trust, but what we actually trust when the future becomes uncertain. Much of human fear is rooted in one assumption, that safety depends on control. We fear what we cannot manage. We fear what we cannot predict. We fear what we cannot secure. In moments of stability, this illusion goes unnoticed. But when circumstances shift, when plans fail, structures shake, or the future becomes unclear, fear exposes how deeply we rely on our own ability to manage life. Scripture consistently dismantles this illusion. Biblical faith never begins with control. It begins with surrender. Fear grows strongest where faith is shallow, not because God is absent, but because trust has been placed elsewhere. In Scripture, people who fear most intensely are often those who believe in God intellectually but rely on human strength practically. They acknowledge God verbally, yet depend on numbers, strategies, and outcomes for security. When those supports fail, fear takes over. This is not hypocrisy. It is humanity, and Scripture addresses it honestly. One of the most pastoral features of Scripture is that it does not condemn people for feeling fear. God does not rebuke fear as sin in itself. He questions it. Why are you afraid? What are you looking at? Where is your trust? These questions are not accusations. They are invitations to awareness. Fear becomes destructive not when it is felt, but when it is obeyed. In the Bible, fear often becomes the doorway to deeper faith. It reveals misplaced trust. It exposes fragile foundations. It confronts false securities. This is why Scripture does not aim to eliminate fear instantly. It allows fear to surface so that trust can be redirected. Fear shows us where our faith needs strengthening. Worldly security depends on conditions. Enough money, enough stability, enough certainty. Biblical trust depends on presence, not the absence of trouble, not guaranteed outcomes, but the nearness of God. This is why do not fear is often paired with statements of presence rather than promises of protection. I am with you. I will not leave you. I will go before you. And the promise is not that nothing will happen. The promise is that you will not face it alone. Fear becomes dangerous when it dictates decisions. When fear leads, obedience retreats. When fear rules, faith compromises. When fear dominates, identity shrinks. This is why Scripture repeatedly warns against living by fear, not because fear is evil, but because fear is a poor guide. Fear narrows vision. Faith expands it. One of the hardest lessons Scripture teaches is that trust does not require full understanding. God rarely explains the future in detail. He gives direction without disclosure. He calls people forward without removing uncertainty. This is intentional. Faith that depends on explanations collapses when explanations end. Faith that depends on God endures even when clarity is absent. Fear demands answers. Faith responds to presence. When Jesus Christ addresses fear, he does not remove danger. He removes isolation. He does not promise escape from storms. He enters them. He does not promise immunity from suffering. He promises companionship in it. This is why his words, "Do not be afraid," carry weight. They are not spoken from distance. They are spoken from within the struggle. Every fear carries a question beneath it. Who will take care of me? What happens if I lose control? Can I trust God when outcomes are uncertain. Scripture does not silence these questions. It answers them with a person, not a prediction. Fear invites a choice: to cling tighter, to control, or to loosen the grip and trust, to retreat into safety, or to step forward in obedience. This is why fear is never the end of the biblical story. It is the beginning of deeper trust. Human beings long for certainty. We want to know what will happen, when it will happen, and how it will turn out. Uncertainty feels threatening because it exposes our limits. Prediction promises relief. Presence requires trust. Scripture consistently chooses presence, not because God lacks knowledge of the future, but because revealing outcomes would short-circuit faith. God leads not by removing mystery, but by entering it with his people. From the earliest stories of faith, God calls people forward without giving them a full itinerary. Abraham is told to go, not where. Israel is led by a pillar, not a map. Prophets are sent, not briefed. This pattern is deliberate. If faith were anchored to foresight, it would collapse when foresight failed. God forms a people who learn to move by trust, not by prediction. Prediction answers anxiety for a moment. Presence trains endurance for a lifetime. Certainty feels spiritual when it wears religious language. I know what's coming. I've seen the future. I can guarantee safety. These claims soothe fear, but they also relocate trust. The heart begins to rest in knowledge rather than in God. When certainty becomes the source of peace, peace disappears the moment certainty cracks. Scripture resists this temptation. It refuses to make faith dependent on forecasts. Instead, it anchors hope in God's nearness, a hope that remains when outcomes are unknown. Biblical guidance is often directional, not detailed. Follow me. Go with them. Stand firm. Do not be afraid. These commands move people forward without satisfying curiosity. They shape obedience before understanding. God's will is revealed step by step so that trust grows with each step taken. Clarity comes after obedience, not before it. Fear asks for guarantees. Faith leans into companionship. When Scripture says, I am with you, it does not promise ease. It promises solidarity. God's presence does not prevent difficulty, but it changes how difficulty is endured. This is why courage in the Bible is not confidence in outcomes. It is confidence in God's faithfulness amid outcomes. When Jesus Christ addresses fear, he does not hand out predictions. He offers himself. He walks with the uncertain. He stands with the threatened. He remains with the suffering. His promise is not, nothing bad will happen. It is, I am with you always. That promise does not eliminate fear instantly. It reorders it. Fear no longer governs decisions. Trust does. Prediction can become a substitute for discipleship. If the future is known, risk feels unnecessary. Obedience becomes conditional. Courage shrinks to calculation. But biblical courage is forged where obedience must move ahead of certainty. Presence keeps courage alive because it keeps relationships central. To live by presence is to accept vulnerability. It means praying without guarantees, acting without full clarity, loving without assurance of return. This is not recklessness, it is reliance. Scripture does not celebrate blind leaps, it celebrates faithful steps. Each step becomes possible because God is near, not because the path is visible. The peace Scripture offers is not the calm of knowing everything. It is the calm of knowing whom you are with. This peace survives uncertainty because it is relational, not informational. It steadies the heart even when the mind lacks answers. Do not fear does not mean nothing will change. It means you will not face change alone. This is how God leads, not by explaining what is coming, but by promising to be present when it comes. Courage in the Bible is never abstract. It does not exist as a feeling alone. It does not remain in private conviction. It does not end with inner reassurance. Biblical courage always moves outward. When Scripture says, do not fear, it is not calming a person so they can remain unchanged. It is strengthening them so they can act faithfully in circumstances that demand courage. If courage costs nothing, it would not be necessary. In Scripture, courage often requires loss before it brings clarity. It demands obedience before it offers comfort. Those who are called not to fear are usually being asked to step into something that will stretch them, to speak when silence feels safer, to stand when retreat feels reasonable, to remain faithful when compromise feels practical. This is why courage is never passive. It always requires decision. One of the most persistent misconceptions in modern religious culture is the idea of safe faith, a faith that never risks misunderstanding, a faith that never threatens comfort, a faith that never costs reputation or security. But Scripture does not present such a faith. Faith is safe in its foundation, God's faithfulness, but it is rarely safe in its expression. To trust God often means to loosen grip on visible security. This is not because God delights in discomfort. It is because growth requires surrender. Fear urges preservation. Courage urges obedience. Fear asks, "What will happen to me?" Courage asks, "What is faithful?" These questions pull in opposite directions. When fear governs decisions, faith becomes cautious and conditional. When courage leads, faith becomes active and resilient. Scripture repeatedly shows that courage does not remove fear first. It acts in spite of it. Biblical prophets are not remembered for feeling brave. They are remembered for acting faithfully. They speak words that cost them safety. They confront power without protection. They obey God without guarantees. Their courage is not emotional confidence. It is moral clarity. They move forward because obedience matters more than outcomes. This kind of courage is not loud. It is costly. Do not fear is never permission to disengage. It is a call to responsibility, to love when withdrawal is tempting, to serve when self-protection feels wiser, to remain truthful when silence would preserve peace. Fear often disguises itself as prudence. Courage exposes that disguise. The courage of Jesus Christ is not defined by moments of dramatic confidence. It is defined by sustained obedience. He moves toward suffering, not away from it. He speaks truth, knowing it will provoke hostility. He remains faithful even when obedience leads to the cross. This is not reckless bravery. It is trust lived out fully. When Jesus tells his followers not to fear, he is not offering exemption from difficulty. He is inviting them into the same pattern of courageous faithfulness. Courage changes the person who practices it. Each faithful action weakens fear's authority. Each step of obedience reshapes trust. Over time, courage becomes less about dramatic moments and more about steady faithfulness. This is how spiritual maturity is formed, not through reassurance alone, but through practiced obedience. Courage often costs comfort. Sometimes it costs approval, sometimes it costs security, sometimes it costs certainty. But Scripture insists that what courage costs is never greater than what it preserves. It preserves integrity. It preserves faithfulness. It preserves relationship with God. And these cannot be replaced. Do not fear is not a statement to admire. It is a choice to be lived. Will fear dictate actions, or will trust shape them? Will faith remain internal, or will it become embodied? This is where the message turns from reflection to response. And this is why courage in the Bible is never optional. At the end of Scripture's repeated call, do not fear, there is always an implied conclusion. Therefore, live faithfully. The Bible never treats courage as an end in itself. Courage is not a personality trait to admire. It is a posture that makes faithfulness possible. Once fear loosens its grip, something else must take its place. That something is trust expressed through faithful living. The Bible does not demand fearlessness. It calls for faithfulness. Fearlessness suggests emotional absence. Faithfulness requires moral presence. A person may still feel fear and yet choose obedience. Scripture honors this choice far more than emotional confidence. Faithfulness is measured not by calmness, but by consistency. To keep praying when answers delay. To keep loving when outcomes disappoint. To keep doing what is right when the future remains unclear. This is what courage ultimately serves. One of the most difficult truths Scripture teaches is that faithfulness comes without guarantees. There is no promise that obedience will be rewarded immediately. No assurance that courage will be recognized. no certainty that faithfulness will protect from loss. Yet Scripture insists that faithfulness matters precisely because outcomes are uncertain. If obedience were always rewarded visibly, it would no longer be faith, it would be transaction. Biblical courage rarely appears dramatic. It looks like showing up again, speaking truth gently, resisting quiet compromise. Choosing integrity over convenience, these acts often go unnoticed. They do not feel heroic, but they shape a life that remains anchored when larger storms arrive. Faithfulness is built in ordinary moments, long before extraordinary trials. Fear often tries to redefine identity. It whispers, "You are fragile. You are alone. You must protect yourself." Scripture counters fear by grounding identity elsewhere. You belong to God. You are not abandoned. Your life is held even when outcomes are hidden. This identity does not eliminate struggle. It steadies the soul within it. The life of Jesus Christ does not end with a promise of safety. It ends with trust. Jesus remains faithful without escape, obedient without certainty, and loving without guarantee of return. His resurrection does not erase suffering retroactively. It vindicates faithfulness fully. This matters. It means that faithfulness is never wasted, even when it appears costly. Fear does not disappear permanently. It revisits, it resurfaces, it adapts. Scripture does not promise a life free from fear's presence. It promises a way to live when fear appears. Each return of fear becomes another invitation to trust again. Faithfulness is not a single decision. It is a practiced response. The hope Scripture offers is not optimism about circumstances. It is confidence in God's character. This hope survives disappointment because it does not depend on outcomes. It rests on the faithfulness of God rather than the predictability of life. This is why biblical hope remains steady even in exile, persecution, and loss. It is not fragile. Do not fear is not the closing line. It is the opening posture. From that posture flows a life shaped by trust, responsibility, courage, and obedience. A life that does not retreat from the future, but meets it faithfully. The future does not need to be known. God does. And that knowledge is enough to live well, even when what is coming remains unseen. Not with certainty about tomorrow, but with clarity about today. Live faithfully, love deeply, act courageously, trust consistently. This is what Scripture means when it says, "Do not fear." Not escape from what is coming, but strength to live well within it.